Well, hello there. So, tiny little bit about myself. As you can see by the pictures there, I play a bit of pool. I live in the beautiful city of Perth. I do tend to grow a few orchids, and probably 10,000 of the employees that I've trained so far have been miners. But these days I'm focusing more on health, transport, construction, and a whole lot of different interest groups. So let's get into it. The slide here just shows the fabulous Mount Bruce in WA. It's one of the spots to stop in if you ever come to WA, and if you feel like having about a 3 or 4 hour walk, you can walk to the top of that summit. But I suggest you do this after a couple of good nights sleep, because it's hard work. Anyway, let's get into it. I guess the first thing that I find generally when I train people is that there's a lack of understanding about the absolute need for sleep. And it is a homeostatic response to life, basically. It's a bit like food and water. If we don't eat, we'll eventually starve to death. If we don't drink, we'll die of dehydration. And if we don't sleep, well, we don't know how long it'll take for us to perish. We can't get ethics committee approval to run any sort of experiments on that one. But what we do know from war times is that about 3 nights of total sleep deprivation is one of the strongest forms of torture you can get. So that just gives you an indication of the importance of sleep. So when you think of sleep, rather than just making it the last thing that you do that day when you've run out of everything else to do, put it up there with food and water, because it's equally important. So why is it so important? Well, let's go through a few things. And what we find across the globe now is there is a lot of sleep restriction going on, and a lot of people that I speak to tend to be living on 5 to 6 hours of sleep every night. I do meet quite a few people that are getting the right amount, but unfortunately I meet a lot more who are not getting the right amount. So let's look at where some of the sleep restriction actually comes from. Firstly, rosters and schedules in workplaces not allowing enough time between shifts to get enough sleep. We know that that has often been the case in the transport sector. We see it in some of the mining industries, especially where some of the miners might be doing a 12 or a 12.5 hour shift. They might still get 11.5 hours between shifts, but often some of them will have a drive of an hour, hour and a half, so they don't physically get enough time to get the right amount of sleep. And the research has indicated in the past that we need around about 10 hours at home just to get around 7 to 7.5 hours of sleep. And the rest, of course, is made up with talking to the family, putting kids to bed, eating, showering, and so on. Secondly, shift work. Anyone who works shift work then has to basically work while they are normally asleep, and then they have this this problem of trying to sleep when they should be awake. And of course, if they're a residential person, then there are dogs barking, kids, lawn mowers, and so on. So there's a lot of problems with shift work and the sleep restriction that it causes. On top of this, we have a lot of sleep disorders, and I remember a research article just a couple of years ago saying that in Australia, sleep disorders on their own are costing about $4.3 billion annually just in production losses in Australia. And in the US, of course, that's a whole lot more. And they do have a lot of research in the US about those sorts of costs. Then we have sleep disturbances. So you might not have a sleep disorder yourself, but if you've got a partner who snores, or teenage kids that are in and out during the night, or let's just say your partner has obstructive sleep apnea, which is a disorder where a person will stop breathing while they're asleep. Of course, this will cause disturbances as well. And finally, this sleep nonchalance. And this is where a lot of people just really don't care that much about sleep. And there's several reasons for this. One of them, of course, is technology, where people are up quite late, Twittering or Facebooking, or watching things like Netflix and Stan. And of course, one of the problems there with some of these episodes that they watch, they think, well, I'm going to go to bed now, it's about the right time. But then, of course, the episode they're watching finishes on a really interesting point, and they've got to start watching the next one. So there's a whole lot of reasons why people don't even try to get the right amount of sleep. And I guess one of the other important factors that's worth mentioning is a lot of people don't understand fully the risk of only getting 5 or 6 hours sleep in a night. And we know through our crash research, in fact, I was reading an article just this morning that investigated something like 144 people who fell asleep and crashed their vehicles in Europe somewhere. And the common denominator in all of these accidents was getting 6 or less hours sleep. So you can see that's quite an important factor. And some of these people will fall asleep in the vehicle on the way to work. Some of them will fall asleep on the way home from work, or have an incident in the workplace because they're so tired. So sleep nonchalance is becoming one of the big ticket items these days for causing sleep restriction. Now, just briefly looking at sleep disorders, I mean, we could spend hours on this because there's more than 70 known disorders. But we'll talk about ones such as insomnia. Now, insomnia is where you either can't get to sleep when you want to, or you get to sleep but you can't stay asleep. You wake up for long periods of time. Or the other form, basic form of insomnia, is where you wake up way too early and can't get back to sleep again. Now, there are fixes for these types of insomnia. Sleep onset insomnia, where you can't get to sleep at the right time, is usually more about going to bed at the right time. And the easiest way to work out what the right time for you is, just look at what time your alarm is set in the morning. And let's just say if it's 6 o'clock, you need at least 7.5 hours. So your bedtime is between 10 and 10:30. So just work it out that way.
Would you recommend setting a bedtime alarm at all for when you should go to bed?
Absolutely. There are quite a few sleep apps that you can get on your mobile phone that will do that. I suggest that you talk to your close family about it. Certainly the family that you live with should all be aware of what time people need to go to bed. And there should be a lot of respect placed on that, because good fatigue management does really start at home. And recently, a lot of the people that I've spoken to, certainly in workplaces, say, I wish my people at home could hear this, because they need to know that. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeremy. Just having that reminder or alarm set that tells you, this is the time I've worked out I should be in bed, and this is when it's going to happen right now. We quite often focus on that for our kids, but we don't do it for ourselves. Another form of insomnia, the maintenance insomnia, which is where you wake up and go to sleep, can't get back to sleep for hours. What we often do is we lay there trying to get back to sleep, and in doing so, we create quite a bad habit, and that is being in bed but not being asleep. And the brain, we have a saying in neurology, and that is that neurons that fire together wire together. So if the brain is recognizing that you're in bed and you're still awake, then the brain automatically thinks that that's okay to do so. So sometimes we have to break this habit and get out of bed and go and read just a boring book in a nice quiet area. And then when we feel sleepy, go back to bed then. I had a client from Kalgoorlie about a year and a half ago, and he had serious sleep maintenance insomnia. He was averaging 3 hours of sleep a night. And we managed to break it over a 5-year period by stopping this bad habit of trying to get back to sleep in bed. So it took 5 weeks, but now we get 7.5 hours a night. So he's all fixed. Another disorder, circadian rhythm disorder. This normally occurs when you've done consecutive night shifts and you find it hard to switch back and you're all out of rhythm. Some other people, especially those who are out of work and especially teenagers, they start going to bed later and later and putting their rhythm back. And it's very hard to switch that rhythm back forward again. Of course, there's a whole range of medical sleep-related disorders such as gastroesophageal reflux disorder and restless leg syndrome. And of course, if you have either of those, you need to go and see a GP. So the gastroesophageal reflux disorder is where acid comes up into your throat while you're trying to sleep, and that will cause a burning sensation and stop you from going to sleep. Restless leg disorder is, it's hard to describe. It's when you're trying to get to sleep and you get this itchy, strange feeling in your legs and you've just got to move your legs. Generally, that is a lack of magnesium in the diet, and sometimes magnesium supplements can fix that. And if it doesn't, go and see a GP. They are very good at this. Now, other forms of sleep disturbance. Partners who come to bed at a different time than us. Babies and children, external noises. And the nice little photo I've got down the bottom right-hand side, well, of course, that's the Rolling Stones at Perth Arena. Doing their thing, and of course you go and see a concert like that and you can guarantee you're going to be home after about midnight, and it's normally midweek, so you have to get up in the morning. So there's a lot of different reasons that we get sleep disturbances or don't go to sleep at the right time. And finally, this is, I guess, one of my pet hates, sleep nonchalance. And in this slide, I'll introduce one of the main reasons that people don't care about sleep, and that is the misperception of risk. Now, there's a lot of people, there's songs about this stuff. I'll sleep when I'm dead. What we are seeming to find out now is that if you put off sleep constantly in your life, your mortality rate increases. So we're tending to bring the dead end a little bit closer and earlier if we don't sleep through our normal working life. And there's a lot of research in this, especially for mortality rates, and it's good research too. 22,000 twins, for example, in one lot of the research, and it showed quite clearly that less than 6 hours sleep increases your risk of mortality. Other priorities, and I did touch on this before, social media, getting on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. Late night TV, I have been caught out a couple of times myself, and luckily I'm pretty good at saying, okay, well, I missed it a bit last night, so tonight I'm going to bed early to catch up. You watch series like, I don't know, Stranger Things or Suits or something like that, and you just get drawn in and you feel yourself getting tired and ready to go to sleep, and you go, I just need to watch the start of the next episode, and then you're hooked again. It's a bit like a drug, that stuff. So you've got to be careful with late night TV. And just a little aside on that, I also do work for the WA Police Major Crash, investigating crashes that are thought to be caused by fatigue. And one of the crashes that's already been through the court system involved a man who would go home at night and sit up and watch TV till about 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning every night, and he had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. The prosecutor and I estimated that up until the time of the crash, he'd accumulated something like 120 plus hours of sleep debt. Now, you don't have to pay that all back in one hit, but what it does is it makes you incredibly dangerous on the road. And what we found out in that crash was he only drove his vehicle for 5 minutes and about 35 seconds before he had that crash. So this is how strong that sleep debt can be from simple things like watching late night TV night after night. Socializing, of course, going to concerts and so on. And as I said, the misperception of risk. I only work 9 to 5, so what's the big deal? And a lot of people really do feel that, and I've had clients or potential clients say to me, I don't need any help from you. We work 8 till 4 or 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, no night shift. There's no risk. And of course, what they don't realize is the biggest risk is people driving to and from the workplace.
So a question.
So let's have a bit of a look at.
So there's a question here from Matthew. Matthew was just sort of querying: is it a greater risk to have poor night's sleep one night or repetitive nights for 5 or 6 nights?
Well, that hasn't really been researched a lot, but we do know that one poor night's sleep, you can be quite resilient to that if you have had 3 or 4 nights in a row of the right amount. So, for example, what I do a lot is I make sure I get my 7.5 hours just about every night, or 7 hours and 28 minutes if you want to be precise. And that way, if I do go to a concert or something like that, or I have a late night, then the next morning after 6 hours sleep, I'll notice a difference. And I certainly notice that when I'm driving, because what I find is my resilience to other people's mistakes goes right down. And I find myself getting a little bit grumpy with other drivers, where normally I'll drive and just go, okay, well, you've cut me off. I'm pretty sure you didn't mean to, and we'll just let it go. So one night of poor sleep has a difference. And what I'll do is that next night, I will add an hour and a half to my normal sleep, go to bed an hour and a half earlier. So instead of 10:30, it'll be 9 o'clock or thereabouts. And I'll catch up on that one cycle of sleep. Because as we know in sleep science, each cycle lasts about an hour and a half. What we tend to do when we build it up night after night, which is pretty common, where people, Monday to Friday might live on 5 or 6 hours of sleep and catch up on the weekend, you'll usually find that by Thursday or Friday, you have the equivalent of one whole night of sleep debt. So the risk increases X amount, but we don't know what that amount is, but we know it's proportionately higher than just one night of poor sleep. Does that help?
I think it does. I think Matthew would be happy with that answer.
Excellent. So this misperception of risk that I talk about, if you look at the bolt there that's got 8 nuts on it labelled A to H, and if I said to you, it's a simple task, I want you to remove those nuts off of the bolt and then put them all back in the right sequence from A to H. You'd probably laugh and say, well, that's just ridiculously simple. But when you think about if you've ever worked night shift and you're working through 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning where you are starting to fade away a little bit, or sometimes even in an office in the afternoon, between 1 and 2 p.m. after a nice lunch, you might find yourself starting to just tire out a little bit. And if I give you that same job then you might not put them back together in the right order. And the interesting thing is, a lot of people don't see how many different ways of getting this wrong there are. And if you think about it, this is 8 exponential. So there are a total of 40,320 ways of getting this wrong. So if that's the bolt that's holding the wing of your aircraft on, well, then it's going to make a difference, isn't it? So I think it's a good idea to understand the misperception of risk that we generally have. And if you think about this, let's make this a road scenario. When you're on a freeway traveling at 100 k's an hour, if the freeway's moving, of course, you're traveling at about 27.8 meters per second. And what a lot of people do is only leave a couple of seconds of car length in between yourself and the vehicle in front. Now, if you can travel more than 54 meters in 2 seconds and you're feeling tired, what we generally find is your reaction time goes out to 3 or 4 seconds instead of the 1 or 2 that you really want. So this is the really important stuff. And of course, crashing at 100 k's an hour is not very forgiving. So let's look now at how this sleep restriction affects our physical health. I mean, you could talk about mental health as well, but that's a whole new webinar, basically. What we've seen over the years is that there are correlations between sleep restriction in communities, and we're talking about worldwide communities, and an increase in obesity worldwide. We're also seeing a similar increase in type 2 diabetes. And the other thing I'll talk about a bit later on is immunocompetence. So we'll just leave that one on the back burner for now. But obesity, the studies have found in the last generation, we sleep approximately 1.5 hours less than we used to. And if you know something about sleep, we sleep in sleep waves, sleep cycles that generally run for about 90 minutes. So every 90 minutes, we go from a very light sleep through deep sleep and back up to light sleep again. Then we repeat the process. And a good night of sleep, 7.5 hours, will give us 5 full stages of sleep. Now, what we've seemed to have done as a society is reduce that by 1 whole cycle of sleep, and we're only getting 4 cycles of sleep. And that has quite a big effect on what's going on, and we'll introduce that in very shortly. At least 1/3 of Americans and nearly half of Australians currently sleep less than they should, and that is a staggering amount, especially when you think, hey, I'm on the road today, I wonder how my fellow drivers are going. And I often think that, and that's probably one of the driving reasons I like to get good sleep, because I'm able to, I guess, step around some of the faults and mistakes that occur on the roads. So what we've found with this reduction in sleep, it's correlated with the steady increase in obesity worldwide. And this has been researched for a number of years now. So is this a good time to stop for questions?
It is indeed. We've got a great one, nice personal one here from Michelle. Just bear with me. I would like some instructions on how to prevent broken sleep pattern. I'm absolutely exhausted by 7:30 to 8 p.m. So much so that if I don't lay down, I get dizzy. Then I wake up 12 a.m. or 1 a.m. and then I'm awake in 3 to 4 hours. Then I fall asleep again at 5 a.m. and sleep for an hour or so before the alarm goes off and I'm up for the morning. It is a broken sleep cycle and very poor quality sleep. Can you please advise how I can prevent this and change this to my habits and work requires me to be on the road every day?
Yeah, this is a very serious issue, and it's not just one for Michelle, it's one for many, many people. And what I find is a lot of people get that tired that they even lose the motivation to try and rectify the issue. We do know that we can go and see a GP, and a GP might either give us sleeping medication, which in this case is not that appropriate for these sorts of symptoms. But they might also refer you on to a psychologist or a sleep specialist. This is a form of sleep maintenance insomnia that I mentioned before, and it's exactly the same as what the guy from Kalgoorlie had, whereby laying in bed is the biggest problem. So my answer to Michelle basically is this: if you find yourself waking up and you're still in bed for 20 minutes or more without getting back to sleep, get out of bed and go and read a quiet, calming book. Nothing funny, and nothing really interesting, but just a quiet, calming book. I often recommend Legislation's a good read at that time. And then when you find yourself getting tired, then go back to bed and try and go to sleep. Reading in bed at that point is not good. So it also tells the brain that it's okay to lay in bed and not be asleep. So what I recommend is Michelle tries that to start off with, bearing in mind that it is very hard to do. It's a very hard habit to break. And when you just want to get back to sleep, the hardest thing to do is to get out of bed, where you honestly believe you'll just wake up even more. So I suggest try that for a week or so. You can go onto my website at beyondmidnight.org and download a few free posters and check out some of the newsletters. But if you want to contact me personally, I'll send you a sleep diary and we can start sorting that out too, because there's nothing worse than having to be on road when you know that you're absolutely dead tired and you know that you're taking a risk and causing a risk for other drivers on the road. So I hope that's helpful.
That was a great answer. Tough question, that one. So one here from Vino Thiko Kumar. I hope I got that name right. I apologize if I didn't. Is it okay if I sleep 4 to 4.5 hours to 5 hours once, and again with a break 4 to 4.5 hours to 5 hours in another cycle?
It is okay. What you need to be trying, it's not as good as a single consolidated sleep, but as long as you can amass at least 7.5 to 8 hours every 24 hours, you will generally be running quite good.
And question here from Peter: How does alcohol affect sleep?
Well, we do know that alcohol is very good for helping us get to sleep. However, once you go past around about 2 standard drinks, the alcohol has an effect on your sleep, because of course this is all being processed by the liver and being turned into glucose anyway. What it will tend to do after the first 3 hours, which is 2 cycles, when you get to light sleep, you'll generally wake up then recognizing that you've got a bladder that needs to be emptied, and then possibly again an hour and a half later. And also the alcohol has an effect on our deep sleep. So the deep sleep is not as good, pardon me, as it should be. And your rapid eye movement sleep is not as good as it could be too. So these are different stages of sleep that are very important to both our physical health and our mental health. So, and of course, at the end of all this is not only do you wake up having reduced your amount of sleep and the quality of sleep, but you might also wake up feeling dehydrated as well. So the combination of those 3 things is usually an effect of a lot of alcohol. 1 or 2 standard drinks generally doesn't have much effect. It will help you get to sleep, but generally won't mess up your sleep.
And a question here from Frank: How does a lack of sleep affect memory retention?
There have been a lot of studies around that, and what I like to often refer to, certainly that a lot of adults will understand, is the one night, or sometimes more in other cases, where we've accidentally drunk too much in one night and woke up in the morning going, what did I do after 10 o'clock? Because I had no memory. That's a really good indication that alcohol, as I said, it affects deep sleep, and deep sleep is where we often take short-term memory and turn it into long-term memory. And then, of course, in rapid eye movement sleep, which alcohol also affects, this is where we get in touch with the memory so that we can recall it the following day. So memory has quite an impact. Well, sleep has quite an impact on memory. Other researchers showed that if you have a sleep after learning something useful, then you tend to retain a bit more information. So that's a bit of a hint for all you people listening to this webinar, if you'd like to go off and have a 20-minute nap afterwards, you've just got to convince your boss this, of course, you'll retain more of this webinar.
That's great. We have another question slide coming up, and if people want to bombard, shoot others through it, we'll happily ask them as they come along. So back over to you.
Okay. So let's get back to how sleep restriction links to obesity, because we all know that obesity is a growing problem worldwide. And it just seems harder and harder for a lot of people to keep their weight down. And a lot of people find these fad diets or even better ways of eating. You know, some people might be living what they think is a healthy lifestyle by eating the right food and exercising. But if you're not sleeping, I'll show you the link between that and obesity and then type 2 diabetes. So 3 basic issues to consider. When you don't sleep well, or if you're sleep restricted, you produce too much of a chemical in your body called ghrelin. Now, ghrelin is a chemical that tends to make you feel hungry a lot. So a tired person is a hungry person. Secondly, leptin. Leptin is a chemical that tells your brain when to stop eating because you've got the balance right. Now, when you are tired, usually because of the sleep problem, you don't produce enough leptin. So what we're seeing is a tired person who is hungry, but then is overeating as well. And finally, the motivation to eat well. A tired person can't be bothered fixing a salad or something like that, and they don't have energy to exercise. So a tired person will normally be hungry, and they'll be looking for high carb foods and high fat foods. So a lot of sugary foods as well to try and stave off that hunger. And then, of course, don't have the motivation to get up and exercise to get that balance right of what goes in versus what goes out. So you can see that there is a very strong link here between sleep restriction and getting or putting on weight, basically. So this is the sleep cycles and stages that I was referring to earlier, and it's only fair that I explain it in more detail so you can understand it better. So what you see on the left of this graph is you'll see awake, REM, standing for rapid eye movement sleep, S1, 2, 3, and 4, 4 stages, 1, 2, 3, and 4 sleep. So if you look at stage 1 on the very extreme left, where that black line in the graph goes from awake down to stage 1, stage 1 is a very light form of sleep. It's not really a sleep. Sometimes people can have their eyes open and be in stage 1 sleep. I often refer to this as the lights are on but no one's home. And you see this in training sometimes, or you might be watching a TV program with your partner, look across, and they've just gone blank. That's basically the equivalent of stage 1 sleep. You might also find while you're driving a vehicle, especially on longer trips, but it doesn't have to be a long trip, that you might get to a point in your trip where you go, oh wow, I can't remember the last few kilometers. And I'm sure a lot of people hearing that will go, absolutely, I've done that. This is evidence that you may have been going in and out of stage 1 sleep. So your reaction time is very slow. What you take in through your eyes is very minimal. And of course, your safety on the road is quite bad at this point. So stage 1 sleep, we're there for about 8 to 10 minutes. Then we move into stage 2 sleep. This is where the eyes will close. You'll lose the muscle tone in your body. So this is where your head drops over sometimes. If you're in a vehicle, this will be a micro sleep. Your eyes are closing. You're cut off from the outside world, and the vehicle is now totally out of control. Stage 2 sleep, another 10, 15 minutes, and then we get into stage 3, 4, deep sleep. And let me just go back to stage 1 and 2. If you put them together, that is the 20-minute nap that we often refer to. So when I said before, if you can go off and have a 20-minute nap after this session, you might help to retain a bit more. Stage 1 and 2 sleep in a nap will help give you a little boost of energy for a couple of hours. Now, stage 3 and 4 is very important to today's talk, because in stage 3 and 4, the brain goes into deep sleep, and it's basically maintenance mode. So on the mental side of things, we get large releases of serotonin, and that, of course, is what I call the happy hormone. It's what keeps us in good moods, resilient, and basically just a happy person. This is also the reason why one bad night of sleep can knock that out and you'll become quite grumpy the next day. Some of the other reasons for stage 3-4 deep sleep is, and probably one of the most important ones here, is human growth hormone is released in deep sleep. Now, human growth hormone goes around and it fixes up basically all the issues with our body that it can in a single night's sleep. For bodybuilders, for example, when they tear the fibers of their muscle, the HGH will get in there, repair the tears, and lay down scar tissue. For the normal person who's just had a hard day, it will get in there, repair tissue. Very importantly, though, it gets into the perimeter or the periphery of every cell in our body and gets it in prime condition for the following day. Now, this is really important because every cell in our body has these little perforations that on a daily basis will allow glucose and insulin into the cell to turn into energy. Now, when we cut down our deep sleep, and there are many different ways we can do that, when we cut down our deep sleep and reduce the level of HGH, then some of these little perforations in the cells will close up. The glucose will not be able to get into the cell, and we become what we call glucose intolerant or insulin resistant. So therefore, the glucose is staying in the bloodstream, and we're starting to increase our blood glucose levels. This is just from a lack of stage 3-4 deep sleep. Now, there are other reasons for deep sleep, but this is what's pertinent to today's webinar. Once you've done your stage 3-4 deep sleep in the first cycle, you'll go back up to stage 2 and then up to rapid eye movement sleep. Rapid eye movement sleep is very important for memory retention and for fixing up our small issues that we take to bed with us. You might find that sometimes you wake up to deal with a problem that you've taken to bed. Pardon me. Other times, if you're worried about missing the alarm, you'll wake up and you'll check the clock. So that's what rapid eye movement sleep is all about. Now, when you put those 5 cycles together, those 5 stages together, you get one 90-minute cycle. What you can see from the graph, it's repeated through the night. Pardon me. And as we go through the night, you get less and less deep sleep, certainly in cycle 2 and cycle 3. And by cycle 4, there's hardly any deep sleep. And cycle 5, almost no deep sleep. Towards the end of the night, we get more rapid eye movement sleep. So with that in your mind, I'm just going to take a drink because my throat's a bit dry.
I'll just ask Jerome a question while you're having a drink.
Thank you.
Jerome, you've been surprised at some of the information coming out. How do you sleep?
I sleep very well. I've just come back from holidays and I sleep very soundly. I've always been one of those unique people that can just shut down and go to sleep wherever I am. One of the advantages, I guess, years of rowing sort of trained my mind that when I go to bed, and I always set a timer. I'm quite disciplined in my sleep patterns. So, and I'm happy I've created this sort of habit over time.
Awesome. And you had some early mornings with the rowing training you did?
Yes, always. I think one of the key things if you're going to be fit and healthy, you've also got to have your sleep. So our focus in rowing training was always you have a solid sleep cycle, you have a solid training cycle, and you have a solid diet to back it up. And there's the only way you can get high performance.
Wow, fantastic. How are you going, Dr. Nick?
Yes, very good. And that's some very useful information because I think you said one of the key words, and that is disciplined. If you want to sleep well, you do need to be disciplined because there are so many life forces out there that want to take some of the sleep away from you, you know, including your own family and so on. So I think the key word there is the discipline. But I'll also just touch on one thing that you said that can be a little bit misleading just for some people. And that is being able to, or having the ability to just be able to get to sleep easily. Now, if that's at the right time of night, then that's absolutely perfect. And I'm confident that that's what you were talking about. But I do have quite a few people who say to me, I can fall asleep anywhere, anytime. That in itself is a problem. That's a pathology, basically, because you shouldn't be able to just fall asleep at any given time. There are right times at night time to fall asleep, and there are definitely times that you shouldn't be able to get to sleep. So if you're one of those people who can fall asleep at, say, 10 o'clock in the morning and then 4 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 p.m. at night and still go to bed at 9 o'clock, then you possibly need help. So go and get that fixed up. Okay, moving on. So I've just noted there that releases of HGH or human growth hormone during stage 3 and 4 sleep, and of course maintenance of glucose and insulin balance that I spoke about earlier. So this is vital to your level of obesity, but also the onset of type 2 diabetes. So moving to some of the research, and basically I only like to really quote research that is really solid. So what you see here is these are 2 research projects. One of them had 107,000 subjects in it, and the other one was 70,000 night shifting nurses. And it's very clear there that those who got less than 6 hours sleep normally, so on a normal nightly basis, were at a much increased risk of getting type 2 diabetes. Now, this was also allowing for, or already countering the things such as body mass index and having a type 2 diabetic in the family. So this is more just about sleep. And what you see at the other end of that graph is more than 8 hours sleep increases your risk even more. Now, there wasn't very good explanations around that in the research, and we're sort of left to ponder what could be causing that. And, you know, my mind instantly goes to some of the people that I've met with sleep conditions such as sleep apnea, where what they'll do is on their days off, they can sleep up to 15 or 20 hours a day because their sleep isn't adequate enough to get any deep sleep, so the brain keeps on pushing for more sleep. So people who are you know, maybe averaging 10 to 12 hours a night, there is usually something wrong with them. And again, they need to seek help for that because this will increase the risk of type 2 diabetes. Specifically, if you have obstructive sleep apnea, you should get tested for type 2 diabetes, because if you're having an apnea episode, which is where you stop breathing, every minute or two, your brain cannot get fully into deep sleep. So you cannot produce that human growth hormone you need to assist you to not become type 2 diabetic. So that's a bit of a heads up for anyone with sleep disorders. You should get checked for type 2 diabetes as soon as possible. Now, while I'm saying that, we need to be clear that sleep is not the only factor that causes type 2 diabetes. And I think most people are aware that diet and exercise plays a huge role in this. But I think that sleep is the equal third of those processes that needs to be kept in check, because I have met people who eat well and do exercise, but they're still type 2 diabetic. And one of the reasons can be that they're not sleeping well. So moving on, I think some of the best research that I've seen in this was only a small research project, but it has been repeated with very similar results. So in 2004, Dr. Eve Van Corter from the University of Chicago and her colleagues tested a bunch of young, healthy 22-year-old subjects, and they were fit and healthy, and certainly type 2 diabetes was not even on the radar. For 6 nights, she kept them to 4 hours of sleep every night, and then woke them up and kept them awake. During the day, they would exercise, they would eat well, and do the same things that they normally did. After 6 nights, they found decreased glucose tolerance, as I mentioned, decreased leptin and increased ghrelin, so the ghrelin that makes you hungry and the leptin that tends to let you overeat if you don't have enough. And of course, adverse cardiovascular effects such as high blood pressure and so on. So this was just after 6 nights or 4 hours of sleep. What's the equivalent to that? Let's say you do a week of night shift, because most night shifters will average 4.5 to 5 hours of sleep during the day. And we also know that that sleep is not quite as good a quality as it is at night time. So if you're a night shifter, again, you need to be very conversant with this information we're talking about with type 2 diabetes. It's really important. Now, these subjects in that experiment took approximately 1 week to catch up on that sleep that they missed out on. So, you know, they basically missed out on about 24 hours of sleep over that week. What they did was they averaged about 9.3 hours of sleep per night for 7 nights to catch up. And at the end of that week, they all become non-diabetic again. So 6 nights to go pre-diabetic, 7 nights to bring it back to great levels again. Now, this was really good information, because once upon a time we thought that if we started getting type 2 diabetes, we could only keep it in check with diet and exercise. But now we know we've got a third tool we can use, and that's good sleep. So that was great research. 3 years later, the same research team basically, but you know, a few people in and out of that research, as is pretty common, did the same sort of work, but they let them get 8 hours of sleep for 3 nights in a row, but no deep sleep. So basically what they did was they put them to bed, they monitored their brainwave activity, and every time the subjects got into deep sleep, they'd just give them a little nudge, not enough to wake them up, but enough to get them out of deep sleep and into stage 2 sleep or rapid eye movement sleep. The equivalent of that would be, let's just say you've brought home a newborn baby from the hospital. You will not get deep sleep for quite a few nights because your brain is in protective mode, and you won't get that deep sleep. So it took 3 nights with 8 hours of sleep but no deep sleep for these people to all go to, type 2 diabetic again, or the start of type 2 diabetes. So the same outcomes as what we saw in that first study. And again, it took 7 nights of good catch-up sleep to reverse the onset of type 2 diabetes. So there has been other research over the years that's certainly supported this. I think what's very useful in that second lot of research there in 2007 was that it highlighted that deep sleep, or the lack of deep sleep, was one of the main contributors to the onset of type 2 diabetes. Any questions on that before we move on?
I think we're going to have to keep moving along because we've sort of got about 10 minutes left. Thanks, Nick.
Okay, no problems. All right, let's move on to something that I didn't really advertise, but the immune system and immunosuppression. We've often heard that, you know, when we don't sleep, our immune system takes a bit of a hit. And some people might know or might have realized that if you sit up all night doing an all-night study or working and stuff like that, you often get up in the morning and you've got a sore throat because your immune system's taking a bit of hit. Again, this is partly responsible from a lack of deep sleep. But a number of studies have shown that when a person is immunized, if you don't sleep well on that night or around that time, the conversion of antibodies are affected quite greatly. And this is a serious problem. It's been shown in research in adults with hepatitis B treatments and influenza virus treatments. Now, we've heard on the news just over the last couple of days about how the influenza virus in Australia has been quite virulent again, and there's a lack of immunisations, but what's been going out there has done a pretty good job. I wonder how good it would have been if everyone was sleeping as well as they should be. And I do relate to a person I was talking to recently, and I won't say her name, but she mentioned a child at one of her schools who came to school with whooping cough, yet she had been immunised only about a month earlier. And she wondered if maybe that child wasn't sleeping well around that time. And there have been a lot of other studies involving children and sleep and their performances, but of course that's not what this webinar is about. But as you can see, a lack of sleep is very important with all of your physical health. So in those studies, only about half the immunity was obtained, and we know with influenza virus, you might only get a couple of months out of it and still get the flu and still suffer from it. Okay, so what can we do about all of this? In the workplace, if we're having problems with not getting the right amount of sleep because of the workplace, use codes of practice or guidance notes to better organise shifts, rosters, breaks and other important aspects of fatigue management. Conduct a fatigue risk assessment workshop, and that's really important. Make a serious effort to be inclusive of the right people in that workshop. Obtain feedback from all parts of the organisation, and do get help from a fatigue content expert. I've had many safety people who are very good at what they do say to me, well, I just didn't know what I didn't know about fatigue. So, you really do need a subject content expert sometimes. How do we fix our sleep? Get help for any sleep disorders. A lot of people don't know that through the company, they often have an employee assistance provider that you can make a free call to, which is totally anonymous, and often they will help you with sleep disorders, among all the other things they will help you with. You might see a GP for a referral to a psychologist or referral to a sleep clinic for things like obstructive sleep apnea and so on. As I said earlier, you can go to my website, check out some of the posters. I've got some posters on sleep disorders, and I'm happy for you to print them out, put them up in your workplace so that people get a better understanding of that. Use them in toolbox meetings to highlight the importance of it. And of course, try and get more sleep or catch up when you don't get it. And you must want it to get it. And as we spoke about before, you've got to make that effort to put the right time aside to get the right sleep. So, to summarize, we need to remember the homeostatic balance required for sleep and wakefulness. You basically need 1 hour of sleep for every 2 hours awake. So a 16-hour day, you need about 8 hours sleep. If you're doing a 20-hour day, you need about 10 hours of sleep. And that's something most people don't understand. Most adults need between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per 24-hour period. It's better if you can get it in one hit, but if you can, like night shifters, they'll generally get 3 or 4 hours and then wake up for a while, then go to bed a bit later and get another hour and a half. Get whatever you can. If you don't get the sleep you need one night, try and catch up the following night. That's the best way to do it. That's the way I live. I'll get 7.5 hours every night. The odd night that I get 6, I'll get 9 hours the next night. So try and catch up as soon as possible, and you will be more resilient. You'll bounce back quicker. Continued sleep restriction will affect your physical and mental health. Of course, getting the right amount of sleep will improve your health and wellness and allow you to be the best version of yourself. And I think that's really important, not just in the workplace, but in your family, in your home. You want to be the best version of yourself that you can possibly be. Now, if we've got any more time, I'd like some questions.
We've got time for a couple of questions. So I got a good one here from Tim. How effective are wrist smart devices on actually saying how well you're sleeping?
Look, they're not the gold standard. The gold standard is going into a sleep laboratory and having all the right measures, and of course you're wired up to the nth degree and so on. The wrist measurements are quite good because they only detect movement of one arm, and basically through that we can estimate what stages of sleep you are in, how long you're asleep for, when you wake up, and how long for. So you can get some really good information out of them. They're not 100% accurate, but they are better than your own personal estimation of how much you sleep, because a lot of people are not very good at that. You can also get apps on your phone that can measure your sleep as well. They're not as good as the wrist-worn devices, but it's still helpful.
Right. Thanks for that, Nick. And the last question, and for those we haven't had a chance to answer, we'll pass them on and circulate them back. So a question here from Frank. What impact does sleeping tablets have on your sleep resilience, I guess?
Well, now this is, it's quite a hard one. I always say to people, sleeping pills are better than not sleeping. If you can get any sleep, it's better than no sleep. There are over-the-counter sleeping medications that are generally not well researched, and we don't know how well they do. But the one thing we do know is that the placebo effect of taking these pills can help a lot of people get to sleep, because a lot of the sleep problems are from our own heads, our own thoughts and concerns and anxieties, basically. So I'm certainly not against over-the-counter medication. If you can get the timing right, that's usually the easiest way. But then if you still need help, go to the over-the-counter medications. If you still can't go to sleep and you go and see a GP and they give you medication, it's usually short-term, 4 or 5 nights, and that will often have the effect of helping you get to sleep. And if that can break the cycle that you're going through at that time, then that's fantastic. If it doesn't break your cycle, then it's probably not good to continue on long-term on sleep medication, but rather to go and see a psychologist and find better ways of getting improved sleep. So I know it's a bit of a convoluted answer. A lot of people in my area say, oh, look, it's quite bad for you taking sleep medication. I don't believe that's the case. I believe everything has a reason. If we need sleep medication, it's because we're not sleeping, and any sleep that we can get is better than no sleep.
Can't get more pragmatic than that. Thank you for that, Nick. You can just go to our final slide. And as we're closing up now, so thank you very much for your time today, Nick.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
Thank you, Rosemary. And thank you to our listeners. Wherever you are, we have other webinars up and coming, so please do take the time to join us for them. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, and we will be sending you the link to the recording on the NRSPP website and also Nick's website as well. Thank you all.